This is Performance EV, and today we're taking a look at the drive shafts. Hey folks, welcome to the channel. Thank you so much for watching. For those of you new to the channel, this is my project to put a Nissan Leaf motor into a Porsche 911, and over the last few weeks we've been gradually getting the motor into position and getting it finally bolted into place. So now it's in its final position. We need to look at actually hooking it up. So there's a bunch of different things that need to happen. We need to get power going to it, obviously, to make it turn, but then we also need to take that turning once it's actually spinning and transfer that to the wheels, and for that we need to look at the drive shafts. So I did a video a little while back looking at how the two different drive shafts are structured and maybe what some of my options were, and now we're going to start trying to put that into practice. So actually putting the bits of the shafts into position, seeing how they line up, and figuring out how we're actually going to get them connected. So yeah, let's head back under the car and see how we get on. So now the motor's bolted in and is in a position that's repeatable. We can kind of lift it out, put it back in as and when is necessary for when we need access or when we want to check something. But for now, there's really one last piece that I want to do while the motor's in currently. And for that we need to go a bit deeper into the less accessible reaches of this bay. So you might notice there's something missing in here. We're not really going to be able to drive the car on the shaft of a breaker bar, so we need to start looking into how we can actually what we're going to do about the CV axles. So the plan here today is try to create some sort of amalgamation of these two half axles, half shafts, CV axles, whatever name you want to give them. So we've got Porsche one here and the Nissan Leaf side here. Obviously, given that we're going to be cutting into both of them, we only need one half of each. So for the Porsche, it's this side that goes into the wheel, and for the Leaf it's this bit that goes into the motor. So in order to get everything the way I want, I actually need to finish taking off the gearbox side of the Porsche axle and reassemble the gearbox side of the Leaf axle, and then dismantle the wheel side of the Leaf axle. So a few different things we got to get done here. I need to try and keep all the components separate, so any bits I do need to reuse I don't lose, but let's get to it. So I got bored of trying to figure out how to get the wheel side CV joint off the Leaf axle, so I cut it off. Now we just need to get the gearbox side reattached. So I've taken the circlip off this end just to make it easier to put in and out of the gearbox. I'll reinstall it before we make it final. So this is just a first pass of how things could work. Basically, I think in my mind I was fearing that neither of the two shafts would actually be long enough in the first place, and that I'd have to make compromises about where I actually make the cut and connect things. But if we look at them, I've cut the end off this leaf shaft, so this is going into the leaf gearbox at the far end, and yet it's still almost the right length to go into the Porsche CV joint. Unfortunately, the outer Porsche CV joint is not actually serviceable, so I can't dismantle it, because then I could just get a new spline potentially cut on the leaf side, and that would be fine. So that's not really an option, unfortunately, not quite long enough. But it means that when I come to deciding where to cut it, to join the two together, I do have a lot more options. So I can basically, I'll get a calipers at this and just start trying to figure out the point at which the two shafts are closest in diameter, because that will mean it'll be easier for me to weld. So yeah, that's quite exciting. Alright, we're going to have to take these out, trim them down, put them back, try again, and then eventually figure out exactly where we're making our real cuts. Well, given that my over-enthusiasm last time has meant that I'm going to have to take some stuff out to recut it because I didn't cut enough off, I'm going to take a more measured approach this time, put things in a sensible order, take measurements, and cut once. First step is the bulk of the CV joint for the gearbox side of things. That's slotted in nice and easy. Alright, let's get the drive shaft. Alright, that's through. Let's take a look at how things measure up. When I was trying to get these parts in, I just had a bit of an idea, and I'm wondering if it'll work, is rather than cutting down drive shafts, which is inherently going to weaken them and then mean I have to go and get custom ones built up, is to potentially get the gearbox flange, which is this middle bit here, from the Porsche gearbox, and get it mated to the CV joint, or the CV joint housing of the leaf, and then just bolt the standard Porsche axle shafts to it. On this side, obviously there's a little bit too much space, so I could either look into seeing, do any of the other models of Porsche, for example the manual or something, have a slightly longer drive shaft than the Tiptronic, or we could look at seeing can we get a spacer to go between the flange and the drive shaft itself. This may end up being a more secure option. Now, I don't think I have the tools or accuracy to be able to weld these two together in a balanced manner, but I'm sure I could find someone who can. Let's take a look at the other side. So on this side we have to use our imagination a little bit, because I went and took the rest of the CV joint off, and I might try in a moment to fit the other side, the one I've got on the other side over here, but there's definitely space if this was cut down to fit the flange. It's then just seeing, do we have the clearance where we need it. Let me take this joint out. If we take this, obviously ignoring all the spliny bits coming off it, it's actually only at this point. We're probably talking about taking half this unit off. If we did, is well past the point, and I'll show you in a moment. If you imagine this is the cutoff, this is where the splines would appear from. If you look up here, my concern was if we had to go too far back, we start getting things fouling on this unit here. But if we make the cut along here, then it's actually out past all of these ribs. So I know it might not have been the easiest to see down under the car what I was talking about with some of these things, so I kind of thought I'd just run through them with you, so you can see where I'm going with this. So option one is basically we've got the two shafts line up something like this, actually about these sorts of distances in the car, and we need to find some way to join them in the middle. So as you can probably see, there are various points at which they flare out or narrow. So my goal really would be to find a point where the diameters of a various section are at their closest, assuming they line up, cut them as straight as possible, and they will have to be very straight, and then butt them up together, again holding them in position so they're perfectly straight aligned, and weld around that seam. And that will then give me a drive shaft with Nissan Leaf at one end and Porsche at the other. What I would then need to do is basically take that shaft to a company that specializes in kind of precision engineering, so that they can cut a spline pattern that matches what's needed for the Nissan Leaf. Now, fortunately, Porsche, this is the shortest of the Porsche axles. This is the one for the Tiptronic, and things like the manual have a longer shaft here, but this bit stays the same. So I can buy something with a longer shaft, which I can then dismantle, take off the inner CV joint, take that to a machine, an engineering firm, and get them to cut it at the appropriate point, put in the leaf spline, and then take it back and basically attach the leaf kind of triple headed thing here onto that, and just insert it into the leaf axle. So that's one option. The other option is saying, right, we've got our Porsche axles, but using them complete. So this is the inner CV joint, and in order for that to work, you need something with the right pattern on it from the output flange. So this is the actual flange from the gearbox, so that I know that will fit perfectly to this. The next challenge is you need to obviously get it in the right position, because there's only so much movement on laterally in these axles, and they need that for their actual operation. So I would need to find some way to fit it into the leaf axle. Now, in this case, it would probably, for this side, which is the left-hand side of the car, it would probably be a case of getting this onto a lathe, machining down these pieces that make contact, to then be able to insert this fully into it, and then get someone to weld around to make sure that it's secure. And then on this side, because of the distances we saw, I'd need to get a spacer for between the output flange and the axle itself, and those are available. There are spacers that Porsche use on the manual gearbox, so I'm not too concerned about being able to get my hands on something like that. I probably wouldn't even need to get something made up. I could probably buy something off the shelf, but at worst, producing something like that is within the capabilities of a lot of machine shops. Obviously, there are challenges here in terms of making sure that the fit there is 100% true, and that it doesn't end up creating any strange wobbles or anything like that. Obviously, the advantage of this is that I can reuse the Porsche axles in their entirety, which, when I come to need to replace things ever in the future, makes it a little bit easier. So I thought I'd have all the answers after this video, but I've kind of put myself into a bit of not a dilemma. It's good to have options, but yeah, I need to figure out how I'm going to proceed here. So on one side, we've got the option to use the Nissan Leaf CV joint essentially using a Nissan Leaf CV joint with a Porsche CV axle and outer CV joint, which will require some machining of the CV axle so that it has the right spline pattern to go into the Leaf CV joint. In order to do that, I need to mock it up essentially by cutting bits and pieces of the two axles in half and then welding them back together. So that will mean that if anything ever happens to either of those axles, I'll have to get a new one built out. But I guess there are benefits in that, apart from the mocked up version, there won't be any welds or kind of weak points brought on by that. The other option is to try and fit the gearbox flanges from the Porsche to, I guess, the CV joint housing of the Leaf, and do it in such a way that all I need to do is reuse the existing Porsche CV axles with both joints either side and bolt them together. I guess the benefit of this is that I can just buy Porsche CV axle as is and bolt it in if anything happens to these ones. The downside is that there will be some machining and welding required to fit the gearbox flange to the leaf CV joint housing, and that potentially provides a bit of weakness. So I need to think about how I'm going to proceed with this. Really appreciate any comments if any of you have kind of done this sort of thing before or have any deeper knowledge about the risks or benefits of either side. Please let me know in the comments. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed the video series, and if you have and you're not already subscribed, please consider subscribing. But yeah, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.